What's happening? Renegade Coach is in the building.
Yo, it's Renegade Culture.
Oh, man, it's another sizzling episode. This is episode what?
29.
29.
In the house.
Oh, my God.
Oh, there we go. My man's a little late with that.
Got the gunshots
I liked
and
it
shit.
anyway, though.
You fucking
You know
up.
what I'm
It's
saying?
cool. This
My
one,
man,
man.
Knocker.
Shout out to the ear doctor.
The
Knocker,
producer.
the ear doctor.
The number 4 producer in the world.
Oh, number 4
man,
producer in
Knocker.
the world.
Yeah,
That's
he
still
used to be
good,
number
though.
25. But
25 in the
came
world?
up. Yeah, he
Or
came
in the
up.
building?
That's true. Like, you know what I mean?
It's cool. Number 4 in the building.
Number 4 in the room.
Yes, we got my man Luce in the building. Luce is here today.
Luce is showing up.
Luce is back. What's
We
up,
ain't
Luce?
used to Luce showing up.
Man. Oh, my goodness. Luce Sweet in the building.
Nobody can hear you, man. You
Yes.
got the mic on you.
Anyway, we're here. We got a couple guests that's nervous as fuck.
We got some wonderful guests.
I'm just
They
cracking
sitting
up
here
at
like,
y'all.
what are these?
What
You know
we got into?
I don't even believe, like,
You know what I'm
this
saying?
ain't the show I listen to.
I know.
Oh,
But
my
they're
God.
like- but these are it's actually a serious topic. Even
Yes.
They laughing.
They like shit.
They laughing more than
They
we
thought
are
it was
right
going to be
now.
a Larry King and shit.
I know.
Cisco
Alright,
Ebert or some shit.
So what happened?
Yes.
That was my Larry King impression, by
That
the way.
was a
Thank you
fucked
very
up
much. I appreciate
But
that.
anyway,
So we got some really special guests in the house. We got some
Yes.
authors who just wrote a beautiful book, a great book,
Same
called
the
None
book.
of the Above.
None of the above.
The Untold Story of the Atlanta Public School Cheating Scandal, Corporate Greed, and the Criminalization of Educators.
Wow.
By Miss Shani Robinson and Anna Simonton. Let's give her a round of applause.
Okay. Hey. Brr, brr, brr.
I could have sworn
Yes.
we got sound
Yes.
effects. We're big.
Yeah, sound effects.
There we go.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
That's
I
for
knew
our
that.
hearing impaired folks who
know what I'm
get that
saying?
shit delayed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So anyway,
And so these folks have come on to talk about the serious issues,
Yes.
that particularly Sister Shani
Yes.
faced throughout the years. Folks know some of the background, and we're going to get way into the background of the trial. What's the next steps in the trial? The bigger picture of why these folks even went to trial, and what made this sister and her co-writer write this book and tell this story and make sure that everybody needs to hear about it.
and we're going to talk about why it's criminal that they were actually charged with a crime.
That's true.
And how
That's true.
corporate greed and racism and this whole gentrification process plays a role, or how the education system plays a role in that. So we're going to get down to it. We're going to have a good time. They're going to loosen up.
I think so.
They don't look as nervous as they did 5 minutes ago. You know what I mean?
And we're going to talk about the prosecutors and
We're going to
all
talk about the prosecutors.
and all the folks who, like, you know, they railroaded
always talk
these
about
folks. You know what I'm
prosecutors.
saying? Like this dude, Paul Howard.
Paul
Howard. Fuck
Paul
Paul
Howard.
Howard.
Fuck
Fuck you,
Paul
you know what I'm
Howard.
saying?
But we're not going to have them say fuck Paul Howard.
Well, they
'cause
can't say fuck Paul
They
Howard.
can't say
you
it,
know
but we
what
can
I'm
definitely
saying?
say
We
it.
can say fuck Paul
Hey,
Howard.
hey, Paul Howard,
Fuck
zoom
you.
in on this.
Know what I'm
Remember me?
saying?
Fuck Paul Howard.
Hey, fuck
I've been
Paul
saying
Howard.
fuck Paul Howard for like 15 years.
15 years? Okay, my
yeah,
bad.
so
He's new to me. I didn't know to say.
I'm kind of feeling like, you
Because
know.
part of I heard, you know, I don't want to jump right into it too much, but you know,
Yes.
I heard that, you know, he had options. He didn't have to do this.
Of course he did.
In terms of like what this case was about, this was like a media ploy for him
I
to
mean,
try to win
there's
re-election.
all kind of people that
So
he
you
could
know how
have
folks
indicted.
do.
And, you know, it's like, you know, that's
Yeah,
how he gets
you
done.
could have got indicted. You know what I'm saying?
Probably
Well, you
indicted
probably
for
have been indicted, B,
fucking
but-
with you.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
down.
Yo, we back, Renegade Culture.
Yo, come on, how you doing, man?
Yeah, brother, man, I'm feeling really good today. You
So
know
it's
what
an
I'm
honor and
saying?
privilege to be on this show with you.
I know it is for you. I understand
29.
that. Yeah,
It is.
you know what I'm
I mean,
saying?
you know what I'm
It
saying?
is.
I mean,
People love me.
And
People-
I noticed the first. Usually, Kamal is
happened?
the lightest person on the show. And we get
Oh,
around.
here we go,
So he had to
yo.
go recruit his cousin.
I gotta endure.
Today for his cousin. Anna, that's all right.
here for
Thank you
you.
for coming.
Thank you.
She's here for you.
I appreciate it.
She's
I
here
have
for
to
you.
endure one light-skinned joke
Yes.
per episode.
Yes.
Do I
Yes.
talk about his nostrils? No.
No, because it's
Do
better
I
than
talk
smooth.
about
Ric Flair?
Ric Flair? No. All right, so let's get back
Anyway.
to our knockers nonsense.
All right, I'm not
So,
gonna say I'm your real dad.
How
Okay,
can
let's go.
identification be good for us? And Shani, you had an immediate reaction to this question. What did you say?
Actually, I have a surprise answer for you.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Surprise
All right.
answer.
All right.
Uh-oh. Well, repeat the question again so we can get this surprise
It's like
answer.
Jeopardy.
Answer
How
the
can
right shit.
gentrification be good for us?
Okay.
So, in our book, we talk a lot about history repeating
Oh,
itself.
bring it back to the book. I like
Yeah.
that. There you go.
And so,
I like the marketing.
gentrification, although it has not been good at all for the Black community, it brings us together and it shows us that we need each other. Otherwise, history will just continue to repeat itself. And these same people will keep getting away with things over and over again if we don't stop it and come together.
Wow.
Damn.
That was very unique.
Yeah, it wasn't unique. I appreciate the answer.
What you got to say
She
about
took the
it?
words out of my mouth.
She took, well, there you go. I
Yes,
mean,
it's
she
part
took
of
the
the
words
problem.
out of his mouth.
Part
Do
of
you
the
really want to be
problem.
associated with
Yeah.
Knocker's answer? Come on
on.
now.
Hey,
No.
It doesn't
He's
bring
giving
us
some good,
together if it
No.
tears us apart. So
Right.
obviously it's something we can use to fight around. It's on my only retort to that.
Right.
Okay, but look at Trump, though.
What about him? You think Trump is
I
good
think
for
that
us?
a lot of people have.
Well, actually, I think
You think
Yeah.
Trump has brought us together?
that's actually a
I think it
mile.
has.
that's the thing that Mao was about, how things have to get worse, so to bring out the contradictions, and so therefore it'll cause the proletariat to fight and to struggle.
Right, and he's definitely heightening the contradictions. However, the proletariat is so far in a hole that, for instance, like the whole wall situation. You have folks saying, well, I wish the Democrats just give in and give them the wall. You know what I'm saying? Is it affecting you? I'm a federal worker and so on and so forth. So it confuses people as well. You know what I mean? Because of the fact that the problem is not Trump. The problem is the system itself.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? So we need to abolish the system. Once we get rid of this system and have an overhaul, then we can get it together. We can't reform shit. And Trump is a new version of shit. He's like some square shit, orange shit. You know what I mean? So,
and I just pulled the second question out the boat. So I'm gonna give you a new question.
Oh, wow.
I pulled this out the boat.
Thank you for agreeing with Naka. Naka's our guest today. Have two of our guests have agreed with Naka.
Real quick,
Yeah.
what if a Target came and we made sure that they hired only people from the community?
A
and
Target?
gave them jobs?
Target. Do you own a Target?
Target came like
you own a
into,
Target? You operate
into
the
the West End.
Well, listen, there's a thing called prison, right? And we happen to be 13% of the U.S. population, and we happen to be 60%
Don't talk about prison around Shani.
of the prison population.
Don't talk about prison around Shani.
So the thing is,
she can
they're
handle-
hiring us.
She's-
We they're setting them up in these rural areas, and we are the workers, but we don't own any stake in it. So the thing is, capitalism will confuse you. Capitalism will make you think that you can actually get ahead. Capitalism, you have to own the resources, you have to own the production, and you have to own the wealth. And we don't own that.
Just
We
like
don't
they
own
hire
the
you,
production.
they can
You
fire
don't
you.
own nothing at the fried rice place down the street neither.
What is he
That's
talking
been in the
about?
hood.
Can we move on to your
Anyway,
next question?
moving right along.
All right, this is more Naka nonsense. This is for Anna.
Do you like John Denver?
Why do black men not go to the hospital?
That sounds like the start of a joke, like not a like. And
That's the guy you've been agreeing. That's a serious. I accidentally
What?
pulled this out. I was like doing nothing. I was like,
okay, to bring it back to the book, there was
Thank
a pivotal moment in which Shani's father went to the hospital.
Okay.
Black men do go to the
Shani's
hospital.
father went to the hospital.
Yes.
Naka's nonsense is truly nonsense.
I know that brought us no levity whatsoever.
None.
But you know,
Your only friend.
yes,
She's your friend for like 7 minutes.
She's like, what the
Now
hell
she's
was
like,
that
fuck
about?
your hoodie. Your white friend says it sounds like a bad joke. There was a black guy, a Japanese guy.
I didn't mean it. I just
put
meant
PP in
like,
my
are
coat.
you
Fuck
done?
outta
Are
here.
you gonna like say
Yeah, are
the
you done?
punchline
No,
now?
that was the whole
Okay.
question.
Okay,
We gotta do
now,
this
moving
every
right
week.
along.
So I do want to say, give an opportunity also to talk about. So what are next steps in terms of what's happening with you and the trial is over. You do have the conviction. You are in appeal mode. So what's happening next? What's a little bit of the timeline that's going on?
So, unfortunately, 2 of my co-defendants are actually in prison right now. They appealed the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the U.S. Supreme Court did not hear the case. And that doesn't necessarily, mean that it doesn't go into as far as the merit of the case. It's just how many cases that the U.S. Supreme Court gets.
How much time have they gotten, and when were they? When did this?
They had to turn themselves in October, last October, and one teacher has 2 years to serve 5, and 5 years to serve 2, and then the other one has 10 years to serve 3. And the executive directors were actually given a 20-year prison sentence. It was 20 years to serve 7 initially, and then the judge, he reduced it.
Okay.
Which was more than the prosecutors were even asking for. The judge was like so volatile emotionally that he just like went off the rails and
Yeah.
It was this Judge Baxter.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you don't have to go in front of Judge Baxter again. Do you?
So this is the thing. Our attorneys have been trying to get him to recuse himself off of our case. He retired, and they reassigned our case to another judge. But he refuses to get off of our case. He's still presiding over our
This particular case. Okay.
Yes. And so they actually filed an application with the Court of Appeals, letting them know, hey, this is all the stuff that he's done. Before the verdict was released in our trial, he told the jury, whatever your verdict is, I will defend it until I die. That's what he told the jury. So based on his own words, we already know where he stands on our case. How is he still on our case? The Court of Appeals denied my attorney's application. So now Judge Baxter gets to be the one to preside over if we get a new trial.
Okay.
And he's actually retired.
He retired and they reassigned our case. So how is he still on our trial?
And this is your appeal is for a new trial.
Yes.
Okay.
It's
And
a hell of a place to live in. Huh?
what's the time? I mean, because it sounds like you've just been in this limbo now for like
for
years.
years.
Now. Yeah.
We've been in limbo. So I believe we have until maybe June, and then they're going to start, doing motions for a new trial, and then I think the prosecutors have 6 months to even respond. I mean, this is just more money, more taxpayer money being wasted.
Yeah.
It's been years.
And the children who have been affected, there's been no attention on that. And so we get this question frequently, like, but weren't some children harmed? And the answer is, like, probably, and by many of the other things that we talk about in the book. But in terms of, and not by these people that were on trial, but in terms of the children who did have their answers changed on the test, there was supposed to be tutoring and things like that. And there's been a minuscule amount of money spent on that compared to what has gone into prosecuting the wrong people in this case.
So how many teachers have actually admitted guilt? And did any of them say that, look, these folks weren't involved, or did they just say, fuck it, you got me, so...
There were, in the GBI report, I believe it was like 178 educators that were implicated, and I think 82 confessed. And 35 people were indicted, and 12 of us actually made it to trial.
So everyone else took a plea deal.
So everyone else took a plea deal, right?
And a lot of them agreed to testify, and that was part of the terms of their deal, to get a reduced sentence that oftentimes was like community service, a fine, compared to decades in prison on racketeering charges. So...
And that's real strong and honorable of you to not go ahead and plea out because of the fact that you're not admitting guilt when you're not guilty. That's a very hard thing for black folks in particular to do because of the fact that it's been railroaded for so long. And it's like, look, do you want to take this 20, 25 years, or do you want to say
community
that
service?
Yeah, I saw such and such
Right.
with a couple.
Yeah. All you got to do is say you did it. Yeah.
Right.
It's crazy.
So, in terms of the book, what if there's like one or two central themes that you want people to walk away from once they read this book, what would you say they are?
I think it's to ask the question, who is actually cheating the children of Atlanta? It's not the educators. It's the people who are profiteering at the expense of public education. It's our elected officials that are giving away dollars that belong to Atlanta public schools through the tax allocation district scheme, where that money is going to developers instead of classrooms, cutting education budgets at the state level. I mean, these are the things that we need to be worked up about, instead of teachers who didn't have anything to do with cheating and in an effort to maintain their innocence have faced this nightmare that's not over.
And as far as the trial, people need to know that the trial was like a circus. There were repeated calls for mistrial, witnesses who perjured themselves, and the judge even said so. He said perjury is being committed daily here. This is what's on the record out of the judge's mouth.
Yeah.
Witnesses who recanted their stories on the witness stand. I can go on and on. The lead prosecutor was caught making facial expressions at the jury. The judge had to tell her to stop. Just so many different things.
Yeah, he said perjury is being committed here daily. The judge said this and did not
throw the case out.
He didn't do anything.
Didn't strike it from the record or nothing.
No, nothing. And so, it was a circus. And as far as my case specifically, I never cheated. I never received any bonus money, and my test scores did not even count. So
I'm curious. And you had said that when you were interviewed by the officer, you were working at another position. I mean, and you're married, you have a child. What is life like for you today with this hanging over your head?
I just take everything day by day. I've learned how to deal with stress and anxiety. I was diagnosed with PTSD, and that's something that I still struggle with. But I just do the best that I can because I didn't want what happened to me to affect my child. And so I try to just make it as normal as possible for him and just try to be a good mom. And he's a happy kid, so I'm happy,
We're really hoping the book can be a tool for bringing people together around this also, because the first time around there was not enough information from the defendant's side of the story getting out. Part of that was because they were under a gag order at first and things like that in exchange for lowering their ridiculously high bond. So we have a website, teacherontrial.com. We hope that people will sign up for email updates because as the appeals process moves forward, we want to be updating people and letting folks know when there are opportune moments to get involved, make your voice heard, whatever we can do to have more support for these teachers until we win their freedom.
Yeah, the bottom line is we need more eyes on this case. We
Yeah.
need people watching and seeing what's going on. Because it seems like they keep getting away with things and we can't figure out how.
I mean, it's unfortunate, but this is the way of the West.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is like, I mean, we can go over countless cases that we've worked on personally or cases that we're familiar with just over the past hundreds of years. I mean, but, you know, it's insane just some of the things that they're allowed to do, especially in Georgia. Georgia's a very ruthless, good old boy state.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, clearly this judge has a personal vendetta against someone that's a part of this particular case, because you know I just don't see it any other way. Either that or these corporations are lining his pocket so well that it's forcing him to just say, look, I'm gonna keep on getting this money, and you know, the hell with what you're talking about. Your livelihood is of no comparison to mine. You know,
Or political pressure on him in some form. I mean, that's something I've wondered watching some of the decisions that he has made that have contradicted something that he said just a few days before. So there was a point during pretrial hearings where he almost threw the case out. He told prosecutors, this isn't looking good for you. I'm coming back, I'm going home for the weekend, coming back on Monday. And everyone was ready for it to get thrown out. And he did a 180. So, and it wasn't clear from the opinion that he wrote as to why. It just didn't make sense why he made that change his mind that way. So there were several cases like that where you're like, is he
about to throw it out again? Yeah.
yeah, and who is he answering to? Where is this coming from?
who's the boss?
Yeah.
Well, look, it's been great having you guys, Shani Robertson, Anna Simonton. None of the above, the untold story of the Atlanta public schools, cheating scandal, corporate greed, and the criminalization of educators. Repeat one more time for us the website that people can go on.
teacherontrial.com. And you can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Shani Author.
True. And do you have a Twitter account? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Anna refuses. She's too good for
Mal
a
got
Twitter
so mad at me for
account.
not having Twitter.
I'm like, you're a journalist in the new
that's kinda
millennium.
weird.
You got to
It's,
have that just as a basics. You know what I'm saying?
Trump has a Twitter.
I mean, my God, you got to reach people.
Yeah.
I know. I'm just
Don't worry
like
about it. I don't
very
use my shit
concerned
either.
about I don't know, social media and mental health. And,
Don't go
like,
there.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's
There's always a balance. There's
Yeah.
always a balance.
Yes.
But
struggle
seriously, but thank
with
you guys for coming on. We really appreciate it. This is a great book. People need to pick it up. People need to read about
Thank
this.
you.
People need to get involved in helping to support this system in particular, and learn about what happened during not only this cheating scandal, but how this affects the larger city of Atlanta, and how this is even in some ways a role model for how other cities and states are going about taking over black neighborhoods and black communities. Renegade Culture, we're going to be right back.
Renegade Culture. Tonight we're not going to talk about Lucy's hoodie.
We're not going to talk about that lavender hoodie. It's gold lame.
Vanilla.
You like that? You don't like
She
that.
said she likes
Look,
it.
you don't got to be nice
Yes,
to him.
his
You don't gotta be
hippie
nice.
friend likes
Tie-dye.
it. Let's
Come
go
You got to be
tie-dye.
nice. It's a tie-dye.
You have one friend.
Ethereal.
First friend.
Oh, that was a good
Ethereal. Oh, excuse
wow.
me.
Ooh, she's educated.
Educator
That's
face.
why she was a co-author in the
Journalist
book,
head.
I guess, because she got some
why
big
we were on
words.
my
Ethereal.
The color of
Let's gave this
royalty.
motherfucker
The color of royalty.
That's
Ethereal.
right. Prince,
We like to say lavender.
Bro, I'm
Fuchsia.
saying? Purple.
Hey,
Just
I like y'all
purple.
matching sweaters though.
That's
Ah,
fucked
they
up.
just,
Anyway.
don't
Can't
call
wait
it a
to-
comeback. Don't call it a
Wow.
Y'all laughing at that, though?
Loose. You got rid of him yet?
You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
All right, we
We
back.
got your last. We got
back.
the microphone.
We got
Anyway,
the authors of None of the Above.
none of the above.
The Untold Story of the Atlanta Public Schools Cheating Scandal.
Yes.
Miss Shani Robinson and Miss Anna Simonton.
Yes.
We're glad to have y'all back. Thank y'all for coming back in. Well,
Yes.
not
Thank
leaving,
you.
basically. Y'all could have left.
That was one of
In the
them
middle.
sitting here the whole
I know.
time.
Y'all looked a little nervous after that
Fuck they
first
come
segment.
from.
Yeah.
But anyway,
So, let me, before we get into the bigger story, Anna, how did you get involved in terms of writing this book and meeting Shani and the rest of it?
Yeah, I was working as a freelance journalist at the time, and I had covered some other education issues. And Shani saw some of those articles and reached out to me shortly after the end of the trial. And she had a manuscript, and it was incredibly powerful. And I had never attempted a book project before, but it felt I mean, it was an honor that she reached out to me, honestly, because I was outraged when I watched the news come out about the convictions. I went to Atlanta Public Schools. My middle school counselor was convicted. And I felt really powerless and angry and wanted to be able to do something about it. And this project was a way to try to change the situation. So, yeah.
How long was the process as far as the book itself?
It's been at least a few years. Because, like Anna was saying, I had written like a really rough draft of it. And then once I realized that I wanted to take the book to the next level, someone told me, they suggested to get a journalist. And at that time, I was like, oh my God, who can I trust? I didn't anyone because I was just angry at all media at that point. But I had actually pulled some of Anna's articles while I was doing my research. And so it just made sense to ask her.
So what attracted you to Anna's research? I'm trying to figure out what in the hell she writing.
It made you trust her. Huh?
Yeah, like here's her. She high. I could trust her. What was it?
Because she actually didn't cover the trial, but she had written some things about gentrification, and I believe it was the Opportunity School District. And so she had written about issues that were surrounding our case. And so I was, I just felt like we shared the same perspective on a lot of things.
Dice in it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And, from when we came left, we were talking about the personal issues of the trial. But again, in the book, you guys cast a much wider net. You start talking about some of the things that you think are why this trial happened the way it did and what some of the larger issues. So I want you guys to get into a little bit around how do you think this trial relates to some of the larger issues affecting Atlanta and Georgia at this particular time, particularly around school?
And I would say even going a little further because of the fact that, like some of the other issues, like I said, Brown versus education and gentrification, the whole nine, because of the fact that we know that it's a tie-in, and I think that it's one of the efforts that you all made. So kind of touch on all that if possible.
Well, let me go into what the one of the prosecutors said during closing arguments. He blamed us for poverty and violent crime. Teachers, educators, right, us, the ones who were on trial. And so that itself was just crazy to me.
What do you mean he blamed you? I mean, he said that you all started that shit or what? I mean,
He was speaking.
nobody was homeless before you.
If someone hits you on the side of the head.
Let me quote him. Let me quote
It was
him.
wild.
You want to say his name? You can't say his name.
No, she don't do that. But you know what? And something you did not mention yet, or we didn't mention, you were pregnant.
Yes, I was pregnant during the entire 8-month trial. And I actually started writing the book for my son because I wanted him to know the truth about what happened to me when he got older. So, but I'm quoting the prosecutor. He asked the jury, why you scared somebody gonna hit you on the back of your head when you get into, right, who's breaking into your house? This is his, this is him speaking. And we're sitting here like, what is he talking about? What does it have to do with us?
Is this prosecutor black or?
Yes, and he's a black man. Right. So just going back into the history of things, and we talk about this in the book, if you look, there were 44 schools that were implicated in the GBI report. 11 of those schools are where teachers and administrators were pulled from to go on the RICO indictment. And if you take a close look at those 11 schools, many of them are in tax allocation districts, and many of them are in areas targeted for takeover by private real estate developers. So if you go back, because I was in Mechanicsville, I taught at Dunbar. So if you go back into the 1940s and 50s, a lot of these areas were thriving black communities. And there were several black-owned businesses. It was safe. People rarely locked their doors. But as more white folks started moving to the suburbs, more black people started moving to the city, there was more black, political power. And this was something that concerned white business elite. So in the book, we talk about a plan called the Lochner Plan, which was a plan for highway construction to rip right through many of these areas. So thousands of people were displaced from their homes. And, you have all these urban renewal projects that are displacing other folks. And then later on, right here, even as far as the Mechanicsville community, you have the drug wars, you have mass incarceration. There was a veteran teacher that taught at Dunbar that told me that the school was completely different before the crack epidemic. She said the children came to school wanting to learn. They were prepared. The parents, there was a lot of parental involvement. And so, after the crack epidemic, everything changed. And so you have all these different things that have contributed to the destruction of these communities. So to have the prosecutor tell the jury that it was our fault that this happened to those children. And that was an overall sentiment in just the media. Like, look at these teachers, they cheated the children. And so now, this is why they're not successful in life. And I'm like, there's so many different factors that have played a part into what has happened to these children. And to blame it all on their teachers, their educators. And that's why we wrote the book, to set the record straight. Who was really cheating these children? Who has been cheating their families for decades?
Yeah, and it's the same people that, some of the same people that were involved in criminalizing educators, bringing these charges, also played a role in some of the issues that Shani just mentioned. So Mike Bowers, who is the former Attorney General of Georgia, was one of the lead investigators on this case. One of the people that went all over primetime news when the teachers were charged, saying, oh, these poor little children. Well, he was pushing for these tough on crime laws all through the 80s and 90s. And he even ran for governor in 1996 and tried to stoke up fear among his white voter base by criminalizing black children, calling them super predators, which, as we know, is a term that was thrown around at that time that Hillary Clinton was using. So, to the hypocrisy of calling some of the same children that he's later saying, oh, these poor children, we need to incarcerate their teachers, when he's played a role in harming those communities.
So would you say this is a case of politics and corporate greed, or what would you say?
Yeah, and the corporate greed part comes in too when we look at the role of charter schools and the privatization both of education and public housing. So Shani mentioned the Lochner Plan. That was pushed by an organization called Central Atlanta Progress, which, and this is not an exaggeration, has functioned as the shadow government of Atlanta in a lot of ways. And there's like academic research showing that that's a clear relationship. These are the business owners that for many years gave orders to elected officials in Atlanta, and those orders would be carried out. So Central Atlanta Progress is now today this Downtown Business District Association. One of their main members for a number of years was Tom Cousins, this storied real estate developer that people like to talk about as the man that changed Eastlake, turned Eastlake Meadows into the villages of Eastlake. And there's so many, news articles sort of fawning him with praise.
60 Minutes interview.
Yes, all of that. But what that was a mass displacement of families because there was a huge net loss of the number of units, and then only half of the new ones that were constructed were subsidized, and the rest are market rate. And he complained the whole time about the number of market rate units and made it very clear that he did not want low-income families in that neighborhood anymore. At the same time, he launched Atlanta's first charter school, Drew Charter School, and then created an organization to replicate that model across the country, and that has really spread the destruction of public housing across the nation.
He's the founder of Drew Charter School?
So he started a foundation, a nonprofit foundation called the Eastlake Foundation that is the organization that actually chartered Drew Charter School. But what his organizations are doing now, he has this whole web of them. And one is called Purpose Built Communities, and it has a sort of arm called Purpose Built Schools. And those organizations now are taking over schools in the Carver cluster in South Atlanta. And they aren't even charter schools. They're something called partner schools, which is even less of a clear definition of who is getting to control these schools and what is their relationship to the property around the schools and what is the overall plan here. But it's part of this plan of gentrification because there's another organization. I'm probably getting into too many different names and stuff.
Good, yeah.
We're cool. We
All right.
No, because it sounds like part of, what you're saying here is that part of what this so-called cheating scandal allowed was a new opening, another opening to demonize public school teachers, to say, look how bad this system is. And instead of this system, we need to replace this system, root it out with charter schools, these partnership schools, other structures that take away free public education. And they use that money to put them into the charter schools. So it sounds like this is part of a larger plan that's been at play, like you're saying, for decades now. But this latest iteration of it involved people who were teachers, who were educators, folks who thought they were giving back to their community, or at least providing a service, doing something that they loved in some ways. And instead of treating these folks with some dignity, they were used as a bargaining chip for other political ideas and dreams.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like clearing the land for, in a nutshell, wealthy white folks or middle-class white folks, and giving them an invitation to come into this new land that they found and use this whole urban renewal plan as a...
Definitely. At the same time that Tom Cousins was fighting to keep low-income families out of the villages of Eastlake, he was subsidizing units for white people from the suburbs who came from this church network, and if they did Bible study with their low-income neighbors or whatever, they could get a discount, right? Because it's all part of this like culture of poverty idea, which is nonsense. Which is that like, oh, if you just had a middle-class culture, you would rise up out of poverty.
Community farms and all that in the neighborhood. Yeah.
So
No, I remember this guy was. This guy was just praised all over the place
Yeah.
in mainstream media as the savior of like the young black kids. Yeah, like he was going to sit him on his knee.
Oh, wow.
And like,
So
yeah, I
he's
was
like
oh,
the
God.
Jim Jones of
Jim-
real estate.
He turned out to be the Jim Jones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
and
now-
people started drinking the Kool-Aid.
Drink the Kool-Aid, baby.
and it's his son-in-law
let's not talk
now
about
who's
Kool-Aid.
oh right,
We
because
can
that
def-
was
let's
What's
give
the
him
Kool-Aid
too.
story?
Hey,
So
Kool-Aid. What's up?
during my sentencing, Judge Baxter, that's our trial judge, he was so upset that I refused to take the district attorney's sentencing. And so while my attorney was talking to him, he said, I don't know if people just drank Kool-Aid or what.
What?
And I'm sitting here like,
ODB.
do you need...
ODB
Right.
Baxter.
And so...
OCD.
Right. And then
Nice.
my mother, she begged the judge, please don't take my daughter away from her son. He's just a baby. My mom talked about the importance of nursing, and the lead prosecutor, Fonnie Willis, was basically saying, well, the appeal could take so long that nursing for her child won't even be an issue. I mean, it was like the cruelest
so
thing
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
ever heard. So I was drinking the Kool-Aid apparently,
Yeah.
right.
Drinking Kool-Aid, you
Yes.
cause poverty.
I
it's
mean,
ridiculous.
yes.
It's the racial codes and ticks and stuff like that.
First
just really
grade
came
teachers,
in. Yeah.
boy. The root of all evil.
And the funny thing is, it seems like school is just a factory to make workers anyway. It's like, let's get them learn something a little bit, and let's put them out there and get to work.
Well, let's train them.
Train them, yeah. It's like, ain't that what No Left Behind is about anyway? Like, let's just push them out there into the world.
No, I think Naka's just brought the show to a standstill at that comment. I don't know what the
Thank you,
hell-
Naka.
Yeah.
Thank you, Naka, for
That's
that.
my nonsense.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. You need to leave that
I mean,
for
that
the
is like a part of the language too in the like late 80s, early 90s when this idea of high stakes testing was getting started. There were organizations like the Business Roundtable, which is sort of similar to like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in terms of their role in like setting policy that's favorable to corporations. And they were really pushing this idea of the role of schools is to they used something like market share, like there needs to be a larger market share of educated students. So they would use words like that do evoke this image of like a conveyor belt, like
Thank
you're
you.
saying. Yeah.
Naka has one friend.
I like your
Again,
I like your
jacket.
outfit. I like your ideas.
You like his ideas. She like your shrooms. This is out of hand right now.
She might get her own show. She might get her own
Yeah.
podcast now.
Hey,
Naka
I should be
and
careful
Rocka.
because
Naka and
Kamal's gonna
Rocka.
be
Yeah.
Sam Dayton. Just anybody that.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah,
I left it
making up
alone.
lies
I left it
about me.
alone. I left it alone. Look. So before we go to
Are you
break
saying
soon,
Naka and Anna are dating?
That's what he's about to
oh,
say.
I was going to say, but I decided not to. Though,
okay. All right.
because
We don't tell nobody.
I thought she would have better taste than Navy Naka, but So look, we got this segment called Naka's Bowl. Is it
Naka's
Naka's nonsense?
The
I-
question threw
I
you
messed
off.
it up.
You
Yeah.
got somebody
Man.
agree with you.
I know. I was
messed up
like,
the whole
God
program.
damn. So Naka has a bowl, and it's a dirty bowl, but it's a bowl,
Yeah.
and he throws questions in there. What
Old
we
cereal
do
bowl.
is that we open up the questions, and then our guests in the next segment we come back. You with us will be answering the question. Oh, well, how apropos. See, I know big words too. Like you said.
I like that
wow.
one. That's a good one.
Let me know if
I
we want to
don't
do
know
this
what
one.
it means.
How
Neither
can
does he.
gentrification? Now, I don't know where I pulled that word from. How can gentrification be good for us?
We are going to a commercial break. Right?
No, we give it to
Okay.
Can I look at another one just in
I
case?
think you should give it to. I don't think
want
you
this
should give it
one?
to anybody.
Yeah.
How can
Right,
gentrification
I'm
be
like-
good for us?
Yeah.
If it didn't
You
exist.
don't gotta answer it now. You
Yeah.
answer it on the
Absolutely.
next time.
Back.
On the
Okay.
segment coming back.
Yes, go ahead.
Renegade culture.
Yes, Renegade Culture with Knockers Nonsense.
Right.
What's happening?
Welcome back.
Renegade Culture, the
Wait a
number
minute.
one. Yes.
Wait a minute. They don't know the theme song.
You know the theme song?
Y'all
I was
can
hoping
join.
they didn't
What's
have
the
to
theme song?
suffer.
You want to hear the theme song for Renegade culture? You got to join in once you pick it up.
Uh-oh.
We make
Are
all
you
our
about
guests
to
do
spell
it.
Are y'all about to spell?
Are we going to spell it?
Oh,
She
we just
said-
say like, what
she
is
said-
this? Like Sesame
oh,
Street? We not,
you know what I'm saying?
we about to
Like,
get down with some heavy
just
lyrics.
play
you
this
know
to the
what I'm
11
saying?
shit.
You know what
Like,
I'm saying?
you
know.
motherfuckers can spell.
Can y'all
Like,
spell kind of thing?
Isn't that something?
Yeah,
All right,
literate
all right,
ass
What is the song?
host.
I was gonna say, my man Ear Doctor, he
Yeah,
did.
we're going to let
he
you
did
get away
mess
with
it
that
up.
shit. You know what I'm
So
saying?
Ear Doctor
See,
actually should be
see,
asking that question too.
Let's come out joint.
The literacy question should be going.
I-
to Ear
I got
Doctor.
something right in front of me. I'm
You
not
know,
gonna mess
I'm
up.
gonna
I swear.
contact the Me Too movement about this shit because you know what I'm saying.
Uh-oh, go
Because I feel offended. You know
feel
what I'm saying?
offended?
Yes.
I don't think they work on your issues.
No?
I mean, they may work on your issues, but not the way you may want them to.
Oh,
anyway,
never mind.
holla.
Anyway,
I got
Okay,
the
here we
correct
go.
spelling. Let's go.
The
Yeah.
R, the E, the N, the E, the G, the A, the D, the E. It's Renegade.
Ding dong.
Renegade
I don't think y'all
culture.
want me to
Word up.
Thank you very
You don't
much.
want him to
Alright,
sing.
Yeah, yeah.
She's like
She,
doing this
and
like-
then she's looking. Our token white woman for the night is looking at the thing.
All right.
She can spell it properly. Yeah,
Okay,
don't worry, he can't spell.
Hey, that's what I said. Right in front of me. I'm good
the
tonight.
N,
You good
the
tonight.
T.
You got it right.
Yeah.
You got it right.
Anyway,
All right.
we're gonna get down to business.
So our guest tonight, I mean, we said their names, but Shani Robinson is an alumni of Tennessee State University and taught in Atlanta Public Schools for 3 years.
Okay.
She is currently a supporter of social justice causes. And Anna Simonton, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, I just want to make sure because a lot of letters in that, spelling wise, is an independent journalist and an editor of Scallywag magazine.
Scallywag.
Her work has been published by The Nation, Indies Times, and AltNet, and amongst other things. So I knew both of these young ladies before the show started.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I know Anna from organizing circles, and I can't say that who she dated because I'm not
You
supposed
can't
to.
say
Because it's a lie.
I heard about it.
You heard about it?
Yeah, it's cat that look like Shaggy.
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay,
can't.
cool.
I won't do names.
Scooby Doo.
This is so
I won't do
rude.
Shaggy
names
do.
though.
This is
But
This
she,
is renegade
know
culture.
about this.
Yeah.
my
Yes.
reputation. Is at
Reputation?
stake. Yeah.
Is it stake? Okay, cool.
Okay, we're gonna leave it alone. Then.
Maybe we'll call this guy and see if it's true or
And
not.
Sister
But anyway,
Shani, I met
Yes.
volunteering for Keep Atlanta Schools Local.
Keep Atlanta
She
Schools
actually
Local.
came in one day, like any other volunteer,
Okay.
and was like, you know, I at the time I think I was director of something. So she had to report to
Yeah,
me.
throw his title in and
No,
shit.
so I just said
I was the director.
I was a director
At the time, I was the
I
director.
was the
helping
director
him
of
out.
something.
I know the fuck, exactly.
And I was like, hello, how are you doing? And she was like, hi, my name is Shani.
Hi,
And
my
I
name
am
is...
from the Atlanta Public. I was like, what? And she gave me this whole history of what happened, and was like, I hope it's okay if I volunteer. And I was like, well, I think as long as you don't say that on the phone call, you'll be fine.
Like, hi.
And then we struck up a brief friendship, and we've been in touch ever since. And they've been working on this book for at least 3 years, right? If not
Yeah.
longer.
3 years.
And they finally finished sometime late last year, right?
It's a long process.
It's a long process?
Yeah.
But it just came out on the 15th.
Just came out on the 15th.
15th of January. Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool. We got
Yeah.
you right after Madu. That's all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how are you guys feeling about sort of the impact or so far the reception of the book in terms of talking about this story? Why don't you start?
So far, it's actually been pretty good. I was a little nervous because of just everything that happened and how the media portrayed us. And so, I was a little apprehensive at first. Like, how are people going to take this? And are they going to think, that... I don't know what they were going to think.
Yeah.
But so far, it's been good. So I'm happy about that.
And how about you?
Yeah, same. I think that what we're trying to do is a narrative shift, and so that's a tall order. And so there's definitely that that hope and anticipation that the narrative of, oh, these teachers cheated the children, which is not the case, but that was so dominant during the trial that we can actually chip away at that, and I think that's happening. So
Right.
Seeing we have a broad audience and a lot of our folks don't follow what's going on in Atlanta unless it's some trap music or something. Explain to the audience what exactly was the Atlanta cheating scandal and, bring us up to date as far as how you ended up being involved or implicated or what have you.
So the Atlanta cheating scandal was a period of time that educators in Atlanta Public Schools were accused of cheating on their students' state tests, the CRCT. which is a standardized test that all 1st through 8th graders have to take. And so this is how I was dragged into everything. So my 2nd year teaching, I was a 1st grade teacher. And the last day of testing, I was called into a computer lab. So there was a paraprofessional that actually came into my room to relieve me from my students and told me to meet the testing coordinator in the computer lab. So anyway, I'm in there with 1st and 2nd grade teachers, but there's another teacher, a 2nd grade teacher, who later implicates everyone in the scandal and says that the 1st and 2nd grade teachers were cheating on their students' tests. But she received immunity for throwing the rest of us under the bus.
Did you say what y'all were doing? Erasing stray marks?
So we were erasing stray marks, and the testing coordinator asked us.
That's why you were called into the room too.
Yes, and erasing stray marks is a written procedure in the testing manual that was done every year. So I didn't think anything of it. We erased the stray marks, and she also asked us to fix the illegible handwriting on our students' booklets. So I was in that room for about 20 minutes, handed my test booklets back, and
that was it.
That was it.
And you thought that was it.
Right,
Yeah.
I thought that was it. Right.
And then what happened next in terms of your involvement? Like what next happened to you?
So in October of 2010, I've already resigned from teaching. I'm actually working at a counseling agency, and I get a phone call from a GBI agent. I've never been interrogated ever by any type of law enforcement, but he convinces me to meet him at another location, and kind of tells me what it's about or whatnot. And so anyway, I meet him. He tells me that there was an erasure analysis done, and that in my class specifically, there were high levels of wrong to right erasures. And he says, "Can you explain this?" And I say, "No." Then he asks me, did the testing coordinator or any administrators ever place any pressure on me to cheat? And I say, no. Then he hands me a voluntary statement form, which was basically saying, you don't have any knowledge about cheating, you didn't cheat, and asked me to sign it. Now, the thing about this form is that it did say voluntary, but, okay, if you didn't sign this form, this is the GBI asking you to sign this form. So you don't want to become a target. You don't want them looking at you like, oh, well, why didn't she want to sign this form? She must be trying to hide something. But there were several people that did sign the form that were charged with false statements and writings. It was a felony. So it was like a setup.
Yeah.
You had the option of becoming a target, or you could become a felon. And so that's what happened to a lot of teachers.
And so did you sign the form ultimately?
I did sign the form,
okay.
right.
So let's do a commercial break for our young listeners here. I'm an attorney. I'm going to throw Shani under the bus right now. Don't you ever in your life,
I already know.
ever,
Never.
go to listen to a cop who wants to interrogate you and sign something or be interrogated without the presence of an attorney.
Yeah,
Our young Shani here got caught up by doing that or allowing that. So that's just a little side break. Folks got to know that you can't talk to the police without having an attorney present. You just should not do that.
Matter of fact, don't sign anything without an attorney. Any type of contract at all. Unless it's a lease or something.
Unless I give you something and you better sign that shit.
Definitely
right away.
don't sign shit. Come on, get you. But anyway.
But so many teachers, and because Shani wasn't teaching anymore, this took place actually at the mall parking lot. But teachers were getting pulled out of their classrooms, taken down to the music room.
Wait. And this took place at a mall parking lot?
That's the other week.
That's where my interview took place.
Oh,
he was like, meet me in South DeKalb
so
Mall.
Mall cop interview. Interviewed by a mall cop.
Paul Blart.
Yes.
She's getting thick. What, Paul Bart?
Paul Blart.
Paul Blart. Okay, good.
But they went into the schools, and teachers were pulled from their classrooms. So there were no attorneys present. They went into all of the schools, and the teachers were interrogated. And then I found out, this might be jumping around, but later. So later I was, I wasn't arrested. I had to turn myself in when we found out on the news that we were indicted. That's how we learned we were indicted. Yes, my husband called me and said, "Did you know you were indicted in that cheating scandal?" And I was like, "What?" Oh, wow. Right, and he said they charged you with racketeering, and I'm like, "What is racketeering?" I didn't even know what racketeering was. And then just how they portrayed it in the news, like teachers had cheated to get money.
Wow.
First of all, I never received any bonus money, not one penny. And my test scores didn't even count. They didn't count toward the
practice tests.
The district targets or the national standards, which is what we call AYP. So I didn't cheat, my test scores didn't count, and I did not receive any money. Now, how that equates to racketeering, it doesn't. It was ridiculous. But when I was in jail, I heard all kind of stories about teachers who they were threatened by the GBI agents. So there was one GBI agent that put his gun out on the table during the middle of an interview. There was another one that told a teacher that he was going to take her children away from her. You know, people's pensions were being threatened. So people were scared, and they were throwing each other under the bus left and right.
Because they could receive immunity like
immunity.
your accuser did if they named other people.
Right.
So regardless of whether you were guilty or not, it was a free fall. You know, everybody go for themselves.
Go for self. Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, you guys mentioned the public narrative. So the public narrative at the time was all these media stories, headlines, Atlanta teachers cheating. There was no benefit of the doubt given. There seemed to be this total rush for judgment, even in the media. So how did that make you guys make you feel in particular, in terms of getting justice or receiving justice during that time period? Did you feel like you had a chance?
Absolutely not. And I was angry. I was angry that I had been falsely accused. I was angry that it was blown out of proportion in the media. Our bail bonds were ridiculously high. Mine was like $200,000. Other people's were in the millions. And, you know, the same time that the governor, this was the Governor Sonny Perdue at the time, he sent those special investigators into the schools. He used the same inflated test scores in an application to get a $400 million federal Race to the Top grant. So the majority of us that were indicted didn't receive any money. The state receives $400 million, and they had the audacity to charge us with racketeering.
And this is the same Sonny Perdue who is now the Secretary of
Agriculture?
Yes.
Yep.
He's in Trump's cabinet.
Yeah. And another thing that was going on at the same time was that he actually called for an investigation into Doherty County schools also. And the findings there were similar, that cheating was as widespread as it was in Atlanta. But that investigation was swept under the rug. No charges were ever brought. And the biggest difference is that the superintendent of Doherty County schools was a white woman. Whereas you had Beverly Hall, who had just made Superintendent of the Year, or national superintendent, winning awards for what she was doing in Atlanta. And it was a racialized political pursuit from the start.
So basically, the official charges were
RICO charges.
RICO.
I mean,
and there were some other charges, but this is messed up too. So technically, to charge someone with RICO, you have to have predicate charges. Right. Because you can't just charge someone with RICO. It's like, okay, why is it racketeering? Was it false swearing? Was it, theft by taking? So you have to have these other charges. Typically, you have to have 2 other charges, but the law changed. I can't remember what year it was that changed it to where you can have 1 charge and the RICO will stand. I had a co-defendant who all she had was the racketeering charge, and she still had to go to trial. And then the way the RICO was applied in this case, it was unprecedented. Like, basically, this is how they interpreted RICO in our case. 2 people who might not have even known each other. They could have been working at different schools. If they had similar intentions or acts, they could be in a conspiracy. So 2 people could be in a conspiracy that didn't know they were conspiring. And that's how it was applied in this case.
Yeah. Now, RICO has been broadly applied. Part of the history of RICO has been broadly applied, one, from drug cases, but then it started coming down on political cases where you have people in organizations like the Black Panther Party who were charged with racketeering and so forth. And so the stretch of it has always been enormous in terms of this weapon in prosecutors' hands. And I think something you guys mentioned, too, is that at the time this was and may still be like the most expensive and longest trial in Atlanta history.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. The most expensive. And
it's crazy.
Going back to what Anna was saying about how we feel like this was blown out of proportion because we were Black educators working under a Black superintendent. If you look at Washington, D.C., they had 103 schools that were flagged for suspiciously high test scores, but their school district wasn't turned into a criminal enterprise like Atlanta was. So in that investigation pretty much got swept under the rug.
Yeah.
I mean, Washington, D.C. is different. I mean, you had Marion Barry smoked crack and became mayor again, so you can't really use Washington.
Yes,
But it was,
you sell equipment and shit, come back.
Well, everything. No, but beyond Washington, cheating has been so widespread ever since No Child Left Behind, the law that made testing mandatory and created sanctions that punish schools increasingly each year that they don't make adequate yearly progress, the national targets. And so now there's been documented cases in 40 states, and in at least 14 of those states, it's clear that it's very widespread, not just a couple of cases. So, why go to these lengths only in Atlanta when this is so commonplace?
And when we come back, we want to get into that. We want to get into this, like, what's the wider focus of this case? What's the other issues at hand? Because I think the interesting thing about the book is that you guys don't just talk about your individual case, is that you tie this to like larger politics at hand in Atlanta, particularly the school system, gentrification, corporate greed, that kind of thing. Brown versus Board, So we want to get into that when we get back.
Child Left Behind, all that good stuff. Listen to Renegade Culture, and
we're gonna be back
at you in a second.
Shani gonna do an outro for us, I think.
Please.
Shawnee's gonna say, like, when I'm not threatened with prison time,
Yes.
I listen to Renegade Culture, that kind of thing.
We're not gonna do that right now.
I'm just joking.
Right.
For an
guy right
interview,
here.
when I'm not dating. Sorry.
Oh,
Yo, my bad. I know.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to bring that up.
Kamal's definitely rude.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'd like to thank listeners. We have a live show coming up
That's right.
on February 23rd
That's right.
at the Philip Rush Center.
That's right.
It will be from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And the joint is called
What's the title?
Can
you
Could
get
Malcolm
something
X
right tonight, brother? What's wrong with you?
Shut the fuck up.
Do your
Could
thing.
Detroit Red
Yeah.
become Malcolm in these days and times?
True. That's
So,
hot. I like that.
for those of you who want to come through, make sure you follow us on
Made you think-
SoundCloud.
Everybody said like,
Follow us on Instagram. Hit us up. Be like, yeah, I want to come through to the joint.
Yeah,
'Cause
come
I
on
heard
through, y'all.
you was going to be there. And that other little cat that you be having with you, I don't
Little
know what his
cat.
name is.
Little
You know what I'm saying?
Sorry.
Yeah, my man Elder Barge will be there with me on
here
that
we
date,
go.
ladies and gentlemen.
See, I got
So
to do
make
two
sure,
now. Knock that shit
make
wasn't
sure
that
you
funny,
come
'cause
through.
5 seconds later, he's going to call
Keep
you
trying.
Chico, B.
I'm not going to call
I
him.
know, he keep on
No, he
trying.
has a new name. He's a good guy.
Okay,
I
Maxi
mean,
Priest.
I'm proud of you today because
Maxi Priest.
anyway, I'm here with these two goofy ass motherfuckers. But anyway, it's been a wonderful show.
It has been.
Make sure you check us out, renegadeculture.org.
Pick up the book, None of the Above.
Pick up the book, None of the Above. We will have a link to None of the Above on renegadeculture.org, so you all can check that out as well. I'm sure it's available on Amazon and all these
over
other
the
good
place.
networks.
Yeah, definitely there.
Okay, and they're still looking nervous, but they made it through, ladies and
All
gentlemen.
right, yes, a round of applause.
They made it through.
Peace. Renegade Culture.
Yeah, definitely will.